Today's the day you've all been waiting for. We're going to begin our series in the book of Job. I know you are absolutely ecstatic about that. I want to give you a bit of an orientation as to where we are in terms of the church calendar, Christian calendar, the Sacred Grace calendar. This is kind of how we organize our year every year. The calendar begins in Advent every single year, which is in the month of December, and it celebrates the birth of Jesus and him coming into the world. And the new calendar year begins with January, and we start a season called Epiphany. Epiphany is focused on the light that Jesus brings into the world, and oftentimes in our church family, we take some time to look at how that light penetrates even into some of the darker nooks and crannies of the human experience. So like this past year, we talked about some of the difficult concepts that Christianity faces and how we would respond to that. Following Epiphany, we enter a season of Lent, which is a 40-day season, not including Sundays, wherein the church oftentimes takes a look at like maybe the 40 days of Jesus' temptation in the wilderness, or the 40 years of wandering of the people of Israel, or maybe the 40 days leading up to the cross itself. The season of Lent ends with Good Friday, followed by Easter Sunday, where we begin a season called Eastertide. When you take the 40 days of Eastertide and combine it with the 10 days of Ascensiontide, we have 50 days in response to the 40 days of Lent, where we celebrate the fact that Jesus has come and was crucified and resurrected, and we get to celebrate all the benefits and blessings therein. That season is punctuated by Pentecost Sunday, where we start a new season in around June, sometimes into July, where we focus on the oft overlooked person of the Trinity, the Holy Spirit. We take about a month, sometimes a little bit more, to take a look at that particular person of the Spirit of the Trinity, and sometimes some of the characteristics that come along with that. We did the fruit of the Spirit this past year, this past Pentecost. And then after Pentecost is the beginning of this season called Ordinary Time, which is nondescript, obviously. It's long, and it's a little bit difficult for us to build a series or a season around the season, because it goes basically from Pentecost all the way to Advent. It's a tricky one for us to manage because it actually encompasses so many different topics and themes that it's hard for us to create one series around it. And so we break it up a little bit, and we begin that season like we are today in August, talking about usually a book of the Bible, sometimes a character study of a character of the Bible, but usually we do more of an expository or exegetical study of a particular book of the Bible, oftentimes Old Testament. And we do that as a discipline. A lot of Protestant traditions will spend most of their year doing some sort of exegetical study in the book of the Bible. We're a little bit different. And so we make sure that we at least once a year, if not multiple times, we're taking a look at a specific book, and that's what we're beginning today. In the month of October, we go through a Vision and Values series, and the month of November, we go through a Generosity series, believing that that is a core value of who we are as not only Christians, but specifically this church, and then we're back to Advent again. That's a little bit of a glimpse into what our church calendar looks like. This year, we've chosen to go through Job, and there's a lot of reasons for us to do that, not least of which is the fact that it's a beautiful and perplexing book that draws us into a story, some of which we can relate to, and some of which is wildly unfamiliar to us. It's a beautiful book, and it's definitely worth our time and our consideration. And I hope that you'll take some time to actually read it, especially the first couple of chapters, and at least some of the chapters in the middle and the last chapters as well. You can read the entire thing. You have permission to do so, and I encourage you to consider it. But at least pick your way through certain sections of it. I think you'll be glad that you did. It's important as we start the book of Job to have a clear direction and trajectory as we go through it. When you begin something with the lens that's altered or skewed, you have a hard time maybe completing the thing without getting off track or off course. I've told this story before, so I won't go into the details of it, but the summer that Julie and I met and started dating, I got lost in the mountains with a friend for a few days. The GPS that we had fell into the river and stopped working. There was too much snow on the trail system for us to follow that and to navigate it. The satellite phone that we had with us refused to connect to a satellite. We were sort of hopelessly lost, except for the fact that we had a map. And that was helpful to us, except for there were parts of the map that we didn't consider. A map is presented to you in two dimensions. Mountains are not two-dimensional. That's one thing that I've learned about mountains. They are not two-dimensional. There are topographic lines on a map that indicate the rising and falling of mountains and cliffs and streams and riverbeds and a variety of different things that you'll find as you go throughout the mountains. We considered the map to be helpful directionally, but missed the fact that there were some topographic lines that were in our way from point A to point B. We miss the fact that when the topographic lines get really, really, really close together, if not touching, that means there's a cliff And that means that you should be very careful to avoid that area. And we went straight through a few areas like that, putting ourselves in unnecessary risk and definitely not taking the safest path through that experience. And it's important for us as we approach the book of Job, or really any text in the scriptures, to pay attention to a three-dimensional trajectory or a three-dimensional understanding of where we're going. Hopefully understanding context and characters and history and language and culture and all the things that go into that. Now, I want to be really careful here not to imply that you can't read through the book of Job or understand the book of Job without a seminary degree or a library of commentaries or a theological background of some kind. I don't think that's true at all. I think the Bible is really, really accessible to us, but it requires that we take some time to understand where it's coming from. And I hope to do a little bit of that this morning. I'm going to begin by doing a crash course summary of chapters 1 and 2. There's a link in your liturgy to read those yourself, and I highly recommend that you read those 2 chapters yourself when you have the opportunity. But I'm going to do a flyby commentary on chapters 1 and 2, probably unsatisfactory. Probably there will be moments where you wish I talk more about something. There will be things that I say that you don't like so much, etc. I'd like to encourage you to either schedule some time to talk with me more about those things, or use that as fodder for conversation in your table group or in your family at dinner or something like that, okay? This doesn't have to be the end of the conversation. It could very easily be the beginning of the conversation. In the beginning of the book, we are introduced to a man named Job, or Yov if you were to pronounce it in the Hebrew, who hails from the land of Uz. Okay? It's a weird word, and for some reason, those 2 letters are strange for us to say, but it's a place called Uz. He was blameless and upright, he feared God, and he shunned or rejected evil. Now, this phrase, blameless, upright, shunning, rejecting evil, appears primarily in only one other book, and it's another piece of wisdom literature, which Job is, and it's called the Book of Proverbs. Now, the fact that Job is called blameless, to be completely without sin or any wrongdoing at all, and that phrase to describe him is plucked from another book about wisdom, indicates that Job is in fact an archetypal character meant to be representative. Another way to put this is that we are meant to resonate with Job, not because we too are blameless, but because we admire him and his character. We are drawn to him immediately, not because of the plausibility of his character, but because of the desirability of his character. In the first couple of chapters, we see Job and go, that's the kind of person I would like to be described as. That's not even to mention the prosperity that he experiences, the material wealth that he has. He had 10 children, which would have been seen as an accomplishment or a blessing during that time. In modern-day America, we don't see somebody with a whole bunch of children and think that person is blessed. We think that poor person. That's kind of where we stop with that. But in that time, it would have been thought that that person is blessed to have a lot of children, especially the number of sons that he has. That is a really special thing to indicate blessing. He had a ton of sheep and cattle, which indicates that he was trading and participating in commerce all over the map. He was an important person in the economy of the region. He had a slew of donkeys and oxen, which meant that he was growing a lot of crops and therefore also an agricultural juggernaut. So Job was not only upright and blameless, but he was also extremely prosperous. He had everything that he could ever want. We also see that Job is consecrating his children or purifying them after they have a party, like just in case they thought something or said something or did something that was wrong, just in case they had too much to drink or too much to eat. He purifies them every time after they get together, just in case, just to make sure. We see in this his spiritual leadership, spiritual purity, his spiritual health. In the first chapter, we see that Job is vocationally, relationally, materially, spiritually, personally, and in every other domain of life, healthy, prosperous, perfect, blameless. He's everything that we would want to be in any given domain, and he has it all. And then there's this scene in these 2 chapters that kind of reminds us of a courtroom. And if you've never been in a courtroom, you probably have seen enough in a show or in a movie, whether or not those are properly depicted, but you probably get a basic idea of what that experience would look like. God is there. He's sort of the center of this part of the story. Presumably, he's on some kind of dais like a judge. And there with him are a bunch of legal counselors. There's a whole bunch of other beings there that are interacting with God. They're not just there to praise or to worship him, but rather they're there to interact with him in addition to that. And God is bragging about Job. Check out this guy. He loves me. He's connected to me. He's close to me. He is spiritually healthy. I love this guy. And then there's this angelic counselor who approaches God. This angelic counselor who says, not so fast. Maybe he's so close to you because he's had everything he's ever dreamed or wanted, and every other domain of his life is completely full and complete. And maybe that's why he's so spiritually connected to you. It's interesting, the interaction between God and this being, right? God does not immediately banish this being. God does not punish this being for confronting him. It's almost as if this being's job is to talk to God in this way. It's almost as if that is the relationship, to maybe argue a bit or to wrestle a little bit. Now, the name of this being in the Hebrew is Ha-Satan, okay, which means the adversary or the one who sort of confronts or the one who dissents. Now, we obviously get the term Satan from Satan, okay? And so this would be the Satan that tempted Adam and Eve, the Satan that tempted Jesus in the wilderness, the Satan that is supposedly involved with and the ringleader around temptation, brokenness, and sin in the world that we experience today. But it seems as though that name was derived from this particular title, and then in this particular case, that this name is a descriptor of this adversary or this being that is confronting God. If this was a Satan who is doing the wrong thing or perhaps confronting God in the wrong way, we would probably see some kind of punishment, and we don't see that. God actually plays ball. God actually plays along with this dare and this bet, and he says, okay, go ahead. You can do to Job whatever you need to do so that I can prove to you that he is in fact truly and completely loyal to me. And that's exactly what Ha-Satan does. He takes everything from Job. He takes his children, he takes his wealth, he takes his prosperity, everything that he has. And God says, check it out. Job still loves me. He has not cursed me. He still is connected and close to me. And Ha-Satan says, but he still has his own health. Take that away, and surely he will curse you. Surely he will separate himself from you. And so God says, okay, go for it. And Ha-Satan takes the last remaining domain, the personal health, the personal well-being of Job from Job. And Job's wife tells him in that moment, just curse God and die. The presumption there being that if he were to curse God, God would put him out of his misery. He would actually kill him and smite him for cursing him. And Job refuses to do so. And God's point is proven. This person is, in fact, close to me. This person is, in fact, connected to me. And at the very end of chapter 2, we see that 3 friends come from a long distance to suffer alongside Job. The initial response of the friends in this particular section is to essentially join Job in his suffering. They hear about the suffering. They join him in it. The NIV says that they sympathized with him. They wept loudly, tore their clothes, and they poured dirt on their heads to join him in his pain on the ash heap. They come alongside him. Now, like I said at the very beginning of this, it's important that we have a good direction, a 3D trajectory or understanding of this in order to navigate it properly. The first thing that I want to point out is that Job takes place in 2 distinct genres of Hebrew literature. Now, when you pick up a book of fiction, you read it like fiction. When you pick up a book of history, you read it like history. When you pick up a book of poems, you read it like poetry. The first section of Job, chapters 1 and 2, and the last section of Job, the bookends of the book, take place in the form of a fable, sort of narrative prose, parallel actually to lots of other fables from the ancient Near East during that time. It is not meant to be historic. It is historic in the sense that it aligns with history at that time, and Job may very well have been a historic figure, and all of these things very well could have happened, but the purpose of these sections is to simply draw us in. Remember, Job is a desirable person. I just recently started watching a show again that I've watched a million times over, and there's this one character in the show that I admire and desire to be like. We have almost nothing in common. There is no way my life will ever aspire to be like this person's life, and I don't know that I actually wanted to, but I feel drawn and connected to this fictional character in this story. Similarly, we feel drawn to Job in this story, in the fable sections. But then after this section, it switches to Hebrew poetry. Beautiful poetry. We're not a poetic society. We don't read a lot of poetry, but we listen to a lot of music. Maybe if you thought about the middle section, the vast majority of the book of Job, as music or as songs that don't tell the whole story, but tell pieces of the story in repetition and in an artistic way, it would help you be drawn into the story in a unique and artistic way. I think there's an opportunity for that. This is similarly true of Jesus' parables. There are mostly story to help us connect to a Good Samaritan, for instance, who's maybe a fictional character, maybe an actual character, but certainly somebody that we aspire to. But then we see Jesus call upon these prayers and use these prayers and songs, psalms even, these poems, to help him navigate not only his spirituality, but ours as well. These two genres are helpful for us in understanding the book of Job. Second was the poetry part. I already got to that part. In the end of these two chapters at the very beginning, we are left with primarily questions. You have questions right now about who God is, about who human beings are, about what happens when those two beings intersect. Why is there suffering? Why is there pain? Why do good things happen to bad people and bad things happen to good people? Why does this all take place? Harold Kushner, a Jewish author and commentator, writes this about these questions and poses some new ones for us. Pain is the price that we pay for being alive. Dead cells, our hair, our fingernails, they can't feel pain. They cannot feel anything. When we understand that, our question will change from why do we have to feel pain to what do we do with our pain so that it becomes meaningful and not just pointless, empty suffering. Whatever you're asking right now, they're legitimate questions. And I hate to break it to you, but some of those questions will not be answered as we go throughout the book of Job. The book of Job, again, is not meant to be a comprehensive theological system wherein we understand everything that there is to know about God. It's meant to pique our interest, to sort of whet our whistle, to help us be drawn into a story with which we can relate. Now, there's something that I want to draw out of especially those first two chapters, and especially the very end of chapter 2 that I think is important for us to gather this morning. At the very end of chapter 2, Job's friends come to him. They travel from a long distance, and says there in the text that for about a week, they simply sat with him, and they mourned and they grieved with him. Now, Job's friends get really weird throughout the book, and they do a lot of the wrong things, but we're focusing on chapters 1 and 2 right now, and I want you to imagine for a moment that Job has lost everything, and his friends come to be with him from a long distance, and they simply are with him. They practice the presence of God with him. They express the presence of God to him. This past weekend, I was up in Golden for a police chaplaincy training, and I spent time listening to these different speakers and presenters, and the common thread that ran throughout every presenter and speaker was you have the responsibility as a chaplain to simply minister to people with your presence. You don't have to have all the right answers, and in fact, we encourage you not to share any answers that you think you have. That's not the point. The point is to simply be there and to keep being there and to show up over and over and over again. A couple of months ago, one of our police officers was shot in the stomach, and she was taken immediately to Swedish hospital. I went over there to spend a little bit of time with her. This is the first time I'd been with somebody who had been shot, and I was walking up into the ICU, and I remember thinking as I approached her room, I have no idea what to say. I don't know what I'm supposed to say. I took classes, and I've been to seminars and trainings and whatever, and I have no idea what to say to this person who has a fresh hole in her belly from a bullet. And I remember sitting there and telling her that, started with that, I don't know what to say to you, but then just sitting there and letting her talk just for a minute about how she was feeling and how she was doing, and then telling her that I wasn't going to leave the hospital for a while. I was just going to be there. And her parents were downstairs, and half the police force was there as well. And I said, we're all here. And to her, I think that meant a lot, to simply be there in her suffering and in her difficulty. I can't shake the fact that in this story, the friends are not taken from Job. It's interesting when we look at the book and the story of Job, we go, oh, everything was taken from him. But his friends were not. His friends were there for him. And again, it gets squirrely as the poem continues, but in the beginning, they were there for him and with him. Could it be that the point of this part of the story is that God does not leave in our suffering? sometimes through other people, sometimes through his presence itself. He is with us in pain, in suffering, in difficulty, in hardship, in confusion, and in adverse moments. He is present with us in that. Perhaps God's presence is most expressed not in answers to our questions or in our understanding of those things, but rather in his presence with us. Maybe his grace to us is found in his presence. Gustavo Gutierrez says, Job's hope will be confirmed by the vision of God. I myself shall see him, not as an enemy or even as a stranger, but as a friend, someone close to him. Job reaffirms his conviction that he will see God with his own eyes. This hope causes his heart, literally his kidney, to burst. That is, it makes him happy in the midst of his trials. Job, although wanting answers throughout, absolutely, and we wanting answers throughout, absolutely, is faced with the reality that God has not left him. God has not abandoned him. It's an important lens for us as we go throughout the book of Job and continue to unpack some of the questions that we have that are raised in this. Where is God in our suffering? Is next to us. He's with us. Sometimes that's through other people. Sometimes it's more of a spiritual presence, but God is with us. He's with you. Maybe you feel like you're suffering now. Maybe you don't. Maybe you know somebody who's suffering. Maybe you don't. But know that pain is a part of life. Pain is something that we feel because we are in fact alive, and God has not left you in the midst of that. Kushner goes on to say, I have met God in the readiness of people to reach out to the afflicted, to salve their wounds, not with their doctrines, but with their hugs, their tears. Like Job, I have seen a world in flames, and I have been sustained by the message that God has not abandoned this world. Would you pray with me? Heavenly Father, thank you for being with us in the midst of the trash heap. Thank you for being with us in the midst of pain and suffering, whether it is long-lasting or short-lived. Thank you, God, that you have not left us and that we believe and have faith in that. We trust you to be there even in the midst of our difficulty and in our confusion. And I pray, God, that as we navigate this book together over the past couple of weeks, that you would reveal to us more and more of not only your character, but also your presence, and that for us would be simply enough. Amen.